It is Sunday, March 21st. Welcome into the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. I am a writer and editor for Packer Report, and of course, the owner and founder of the Pack a Day podcast here on YouTube, as well as wherever you get your favorite audio podcasts. Today, I'm going to be going over the cornerback position, and more specifically, the fact that free agent corners are coming off the board, and we're starting to get to the point where there's some slim pickings left in free agency, which of course is an issue if you're the Green Bay Packers or a Packer fan, because right now your depth chart consists of Jair Alexander, Chandon Sullivan, Josh Jackson, Kadar Hallman, KB Ento, basically not a ton, right? It's Jair Alexander and a bunch of question marks. And I've been through this before, but maybe you feel okay with a Chandon Sullivan as your slot. Josh Jackson, Kadar Hallman, not even active towards the end of last season. KB Ento missed the entire season with injury. It's just not a great setup right now. And it's not like this is one of those positions where you can just kind of scheme around and be like, we'll be okay. Like, this is a very important position. And even Kevin King, Chandon Sullivan targeted in an NFC Championship game pretty regularly, especially on more important third down situations. So there's work to be done here. No questions about it. And going into free agency, I think a lot of people, myself included, thought that this was going to be a position that Brian Gutekunst would attack fairly aggressively. And going back in history, as I've also mentioned before, when they needed guards, he goes out and he gets Elton Jenkins and Billy Turner. When they need safeties, he gets Amos and Darnell Savage. When he needs edge rushers, he gets Preston, Za'Darius, Rashawn Gary. When he needs tight ends, he goes out and he gets Jimmy Graham and Mercedes Lewis. When he needed corners, he went out and got Devon House, Tramon Williams, Jair Alexander, and Josh Jackson all in one offseason. And a couple things here. This isn't to say in any way, shape, or form that Green Bay's out of these conversations. There's still players left, and I still expect them to add a corner at some point. This also doesn't mean that they can't, address it aggressively in the draft also. It doesn't mean that, prior to cut down time that they couldn't add a player. It doesn't mean at the trade deadline they couldn't add a player. As Brian Gutekunst often mentions, building your roster is a 365-day-a-year process. It doesn't stop. So because they didn't get one in the first week of free agency does not mean that all is lost. But it does mean that the pickings are getting slim at that cornerback position if they did want to add one in free agency. And that was evidenced quite a bit on Saturday as, first of all, the Bears did in fact release Kyle Fuller, and within about a half an hour, he was signed by the Denver Broncos. So, of course, everyone on social media, super excited. Kyle Fuller's a free agent. There was even a report that the Bears were looking to trade him because there was some concern internally that the Packers might be the team that would sign him if he became a free agent. And then, literally minutes later, he was a Bronco. So that's a big name off the board. And then a little bit after that, Xavier Rhodes, Colts free agent, re-signs with the Colts. And definitely two names that matched with Green Bay, right? For a couple different reasons. One, Fuller, he came from the Vic Fangio defense, and he's going to a Vic Fangio defense. He fits perfectly in that system. He's played in that system. And Green Bay, we know even before playing in that system where he plays perfectly, plays really well, Green Bay signed him to that huge offer sheet just a few years back to try to get him to come in Green Bay. And we know that Fuller was good with playing in Green Bay because he signed that offer sheet. This is not a situation where he's just, he has to go with whoever signs him to an offer sheet. He has to sign it. He was interested in playing for Green Bay. And, again, he's a scheme fit. He certainly would fill that position perfectly, beside Jair Alexander. And let's be real here. This was not an exorbitant contract that I don't think Green Bay could have found money for. And I know things are insanely tight. And I know they have a draft class. They got to sign 53 guys, practice squad, all of that. But he goes for $9.5 million. And I should mention here, Kyle Fuller may have just wanted to go to Denver and play with Vic Fangio and reunite with Bryce Callahan, right? We have no idea. We don't know his motivation. The Packers could have offered him $12 million and he said, I'm going to Denver. Green Bay may have offered $15 million and he said, I'm going to Denver. We don't know that side of the story. And if it was going to get to a bidding war, we know that probably Green Bay maybe wasn't involved because of the salary cap situation. But let's say that apples to apples, the Packers offer $9.5 million and the Broncos offer $9.5 million, and he would have taken Green Bay in that situation. Again, we don't know that, and it's probably not the case. To me, That's a deal Green Bay has to make. Like $9.5 million for Kyle Fuller across from Jair Alexander. That is just a deal that you have to figure out to make this run. It's a 1-year deal, low risk, high reward, teaming him with Jair Alexander. You're going to run into a number issue because they're both number 23. But outside of that, everything here is perfect. And then you've got Amos, who also, by the way, he reunites with Adrian Amos in that situation. Darnell Savage. I still think you could get away with Sullivan in the slot in that situation. It's just a match made in heaven if you're the Packers. And I know, again, that things are tight, but man, that just feels like a deal that if you're Green Bay, you need to be aggressive in trying to make. And maybe they were. We don't know. And it's quite possible, again, that he just wanted to go in Denver. But this is definitely either way you look at it, even if he just wanted to play in Denver, it's unfortunately a missed opportunity for Green Bay to have somebody like that be able to come in and pair with Jair Alexander in a position of arguably their greatest need at this very moment. So that is definitely a miss. And the other thing here, and let's just say again that he was willing to play in Green Bay for around that money. Let's even say if it was $10 million, $11 million, he would have came to Green Bay if Green Bay upped the offer. And the reason that Green Bay couldn't sign him was due to just the cap situation, right? Preston Smith will ultimately cost Green Bay $8 million or more, depending on if he reached some of his incentives, but $8 million for playing this season. Dean Lowry will cost over $3 million for playing this season. And every decision that's made, whether it's a re-signing, whether it's a release, whether it's a trade, whether it's a draft pick, whatever, everything has options that you need to weigh out. And if the option here was Preston Smith and Dean Lowry, or Kyle Fuller, a player like Kyle Fuller, or a Patrick Peterson, because Peterson goes for $8 million, Fuller goes for $9.5, both on 1-year deals. And in the meantime, almost for sure, if Lowry doesn't get cut still this season, he's going to get cut next year. And almost for sure, Preston gets cut next year, which means that they are combined making over $11 million just for this one season of play. And again, this isn't fantasy football, right? There's human elements to this. Preston Smith is a human in your locker room. So is Dean Lowry. Lowry's put a ton of time, effort, and energy into the Packers. Preston Smith has been a huge key member of that locker room the past couple seasons and was very integral in the 2019 success. There are human elements involved here. This isn't just business. I get all of those things. And most importantly, this isn't fantasy football. But if the option is $11 million for Dean Lowry or Preston Smith, or the same amount, let's say they even had to up the offer for a Kyle Fuller or a Patrick Peterson, Green Bay made a mistake there. And there's no two ways around it. They are a much better team with either Kyle Fuller or Patrick Peterson than with Preston and Dean Lowry. And I get that to some extent, you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. Yes, you would upgrade at corner. Now you'd have another hole in the defensive line and at edge rusher because you need probably more than Gary and Zadarius Smith. But personally, the impact that would be made by Kyle Fuller and, like let's say they go out and get a cheap third edge rusher and let's even say they just replace Dean Lowry with a Tyler Lancaster on a cheaper deal than what they were going to get him at the restricted rate. That's a better impact than say Preston Smith, Dean Lowry, and a lower tier corner that they're going to get at the back end of free agency. I just think that's a better value in that scenario. And I can't imagine there's many people that if given the choice between Dean Lowry and Preston Smith or Kyle Fuller are going to say, yeah, give me Preston and Dean. And if so, I'll politely say you're wrong, period. And again, we don't know all of the situations, and we don't know if Kyle Fuller or Patrick Peterson would have came to Green Bay anyway. We just don't know that. But it's fair to question the use of resources in those sort of scenarios. And if keeping Preston and Dean Lowry at those deals is better than being able to have some money to spend and go out and get. And the last thing I'll say about this is you might be thinking, well, Andy, Dean's going to cost about an extra $3 million this year, and Preston's only about $0.75 million more this year, and then the rest is going to hit into next year, and that's true. But you could also sign somebody now and move part of Aaron Rodgers' deal into next year, and it's the exact same thing. So there's ways to make that work. And yes, it's apples to apples when you compare how much money you would have spent on Preston and Dean to what in likely potentially even less on Kyle Fuller, or a Patrick Peterson. So those are all things that are going to be under the microscope for how Green Bay builds the roster this offseason. And again, we don't know the whole story, and there's time left. They could still go out and maybe they end up with Aaron Jones, and maybe they end up with Preston Smith, and maybe they end up with a Richard Sherman or an Adoree Jackson. we have plenty of time to dissect all of this as time goes on and be mad later, right? But as of right now, it's fair still to question the process leading up to this point. And Green Bay still has plenty of time to make this all work together and all the puzzle pieces fit. And if they get a better, an equal or close, corner to a Kyle Fuller or a Patrick Peterson at a much lower cost, maybe in a couple weeks, it looks really great that the decision they made. We just don't have all the information to make a full educated, knowledgeable critique at this point based off what we know. But there's some pieces now that we know that it's at least worth bringing up and discussing a little bit more. More importantly here, Green Bay is running out of options at the cornerback position. Again, Xavier Rhodes, Kyle Fuller, both off the market. Richard Sherman's still out there. I question age, scheme fit. He had a decline last year, didn't play the same level as he has in previous seasons. Again, he's been mostly a cover 3. This Vic Fangio defense is more of a 2 safety deep type defense. I'm not saying Richard Sherman can't play that, but I don't know that it's the best fit for his skill set. And he could outprice himself elsewhere as well. Casey Hayward, same thing. Remember, this Vic Fangio, Brandon Staley defense, the Chargers cut Casey Hayward with Brandon Staley as head coach. If they thought he was an amazing fit in their defense, they'd probably hang on to him. So that's a red flag. And again, Hayward's getting up in age, also had a decline last season. AJ Bouye played in Vic Fangio's defense the last 2 seasons. Did not play well in Vic Fangio's defense the last 2 seasons. Malcolm Butler, getting up there in age, probably doesn't have the height that they want. Did have the connection with Matt LaFleur. At least they were in Tennessee together for a season. But I'm not sure that that's a direction that they'd want to go in. Adoree Jackson, in my opinion, would be a phenomenal option. But he's set to be in New York on Sunday, Philadelphia on Monday. There's a lot of teams interested. And my guess, he's going to outprice himself out of Green Bay and what they're going to be able to offer this offseason. Kevin King, do you bring him back? It certainly seems more and more an option every day that goes on. King's not probably going to get you, if he does get you a compensatory pick, it's maybe a 7th round pick. He's not getting a big deal elsewhere. And as days goes, on, it might end up being the case, which trust me, I'm not advocating for, but the longer we go on, the more likely it could seem that Kevin King actually ends up back in Green Bay. One name that I do want to bring up is former Washington football team and Seattle Seahawk corner Quinton Dunbar. Did play in Washington when Joe Barry was there, so there's at least a little bit of a connection there. Played well in Washington through a few seasons, and in 2019 played really well for the Washington football team. Was traded for a 4th round pick to Seattle, had that crazy offseason situation with DeAndre Baker. Didn't get into camp and had all the distractions, plus with the pandemic and everything else. Comes in, struggles, gets injured, pretty much out for the rest of the year. Not a great season for Quinton Dunbar. The Seahawks did not get their return on investment for the 4th round pick, but he's 6'2", good size, 202, solid tackler, and he's shown signs of being a really good cover player, specifically going back to 2020 in Washington, or 2019 in Washington, excuse me. So this is a player that if you can get him on like a 1-year, $3 million deal or something like that, that to me is at least a potential upgrade from Kevin King, and is a player that could make some sense. And if he gets back into form like he played in 2019, you end up with a really good corner opposite Jair Alexander on a cheap deal, and that allows you then to address the position and draft and not necessarily have to start somebody from day one if they're not incredibly ready. So Quinton Dunbar could be somebody that I think they take a look at. One name also that I mentioned earlier this offseason that I would have been interested in, Stephon Gilmore. Based on what New England's done this offseason by acquiring a ton of people, it just seems that they're trying to win now. And if that's the case, I don't know that they're going to trade Gilmore. Now, you can never get a read on the Patriots. They'll sign a ton of guys and then the next day trade one of their best players. Like, you just don't know, right? But let's put it this way. If Green Bay hasn't been interested in the $8.5 million deals, the Patrick Petersons, or the $9.5 for the Kyle Fuller, hasn't seemingly been very much engaged in those conversations, can you see Brian Gutekunst trading for a $7 million plus player and using a 2nd round pick probably to acquire him? There's just no way. Put it this way. If you could get Patrick Peterson or Kyle Fuller on $9.5 million, would you rather have them at $9.5 million or Gilmore for $7 and a 2nd round pick? And the answer is Peterson or Fuller every day of the week. So I can't see that would be a potential opportunity. And again, New England might just want to hold on to him anyway based on what they've done this offseason. So it'll be interesting to see, can they still attack the corner position and find somebody that's going to fit their scheme, fit their price range, and hopefully upgrade this team. One other piece of news, there had been some rumors that Akeem Hicks might be out in Chicago. It now seems like he will be staying on the team, which fine, whatever. But if that was a potential target for some of you that you were hoping Green Bay would get, if he was released, it sounds like he is staying. And of course that affects the division as well. You never want, an Akeem Hicks on a defensive line for an opposing divisional team, but it sounds like he's going to stay in Chicago. That's going to do it for me. Hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, feel free to subscribe. I would love that. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. I'll be right back here tomorrow. Make sure to check out Gage and Mike on today's audio version of the podcast. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.